So things that have worked, I've put I put one example on here, menu and ribbon shortcuts. If you mouse over, I show here on the right-hand side, if you mouse over some of the icons in the Microsoft, I guess this is PowerPoint because it's got slideshow up there. You mouse over the left-hand icon here that I put a red box around, then it tells you that you can do that with Control-L, making the text left justified. And the whole point of the ribbon, by the way, when Microsoft introduced it about 20-odd years ago, was to make things much more visual, to make them more self-explanatory. So by putting those out sort of on the shop window, you can see that, oh, look, there are 3 or 4 things here. That looks like left justify. And what are those others? Well, I can work it out from the context because there's left justify, center, right justify, and flush. Which is what that last one is for. And then you would get the keyboard shortcuts for that just by mousing over. And of course, we don't have mousing over on mobile devices, so there have to be other ways of achieving that. And you don't tend to see such detailed interfaces on mobile devices either, because there just isn't the space. And humans lack enough manual dexterity. You'd have to go back to the old styluses to do anything as detailed as this on mobiles, and that really would not be a step in the right direction. Tutorials work, and we see a lot of those on apps, offers of tutorials. Contextual help was great. It has more or less disappeared, unfortunately. It used to be a long time ago that if you were in an application and you were looking at a particular dialogue and there were things on that dialogue, like it was a small form that you had to fill out, or some settings, you could just press the F1 key and you'd get help about that specific dialogue. And you wouldn't have to work out what that dialogue was called or what that feature was called and look it up in the help. It was right there, and it was straightforward, and companies used to invest a lot of time and effort in making the contextual help work. And I'm afraid that's all gone out the window, which is sad because it was really helpful. Tooltips, menu, hints, pop-ups, these are really what we're seeing a lot of all over the place now, desktops and mobile apps. Information icons, even more popular on mobile apps because that gives us a chance to tap to get some help, whereas on the desktop, we could mouse over something and have a little pop-up appear. We can't do that, obviously, on touch screens. So information icons with a circle eye, sometimes circle question mark, which is a little bit weird, but I guess it's understandable. And finally, and certainly not least, so it's last, but it really is not least, is progressive disclosure, this idea of just putting more advanced things further down the page so that people are getting the idea that maybe this isn't for me, especially if you've got a heading further down the page that says advanced. And I've even seen things like don't touch these unless you know what you're doing, which is a little bit scary and admittedly probably a bit of overkill for many application areas. Things that have been tried in the past and did not work out. There were versions of Microsoft Office in the early days with what we refer to in HCI as training wheels, that like a kid's bicycle. By the way, training wheels aren't even recommended on bikes anymore. It's much easier to teach kids to ride by just taking the pedals off and letting them scoot and getting their balance than to have training wheels, which, if you saw a kid on a bike who really didn't have good balance and it had training wheels, you'd see them leaning way to one side because they're relying on the training wheels to hold them up. So it was never a good idea on bikes, really, and it was never a good idea in software either, because eventually users would get to the point where they wanted a feature that wasn't in the easy version of the menus, and they would now have to turn the long menus on. In fact, in Office, it was called short and long menus at one point. And when you turned the long menus on, all hell broke loose. It was just, something that had 7 items in it now had 27 items in it, and you were struggling just to do common things because everything was different now. So that wasn't good. And similarly, customizable menus. They used to go to some effort to have things like these were the most recently used menu items, and you'd go and look at them. And that would be handy when you first started to do it. But then, of course, when you started doing something else and you came back, nothing would be where you left it. And Being able to change the menus turned out to be a really bad idea from a support point of view, because people would ring up the support desk when we had those, and you wouldn't be able to talk them through the solution because their menus were customized. So that got a bit ugly. And generic help. Generic help is, I think, a big fail, and you'll see it everywhere. And this is an example of it on the right-hand side, where I was using Microsoft Word. I think this was the app on Windows, the current one, and that's it. I mean, just a search box and some really, really fantastically general topics like get started. Collaborate is topic number 2, really. And the thing is about generic help and that whole approach is that users need to understand what they're doing in order to know enough to ask a sensible question. So if you don't know the name of the feature, or you don't know how to do something at all, then being given a help page like this, it'd be like ringing somebody up and saying, I want to do this, but without knowing what this is. You'd have to kind of explain it in 20 or 30 words and hope that the person at the other end could hear you well enough and understand what you're saying well enough to kind of work out what you're talking about. So yeah, those don't particularly work, unfortunately.